Roger and Whitebeard, Rox and Herald, and now Luffy and Loki. For every Pirate King figure in the story, Oda has always written in a counterpart who can stand side by side with them as equal. They're one true peer in the world. Loki is the character that Oda has been waiting to introduce to us at the end of the story all this time, because Oda was always saving the most important side character in One Piece for last. Loki is the first character in One Piece to have the same origin story as Luffy, the same driving motivation as Luffy, and now even the same caliber of god-slaying legendary fruit as Luffy. Why? Because finally this is not someone who is meant to simply slot in amongst the giant growing crowd of allies for the Straw Hats in the final war. No, finally we have the one character who is meant to genuinely stand shoulder to shoulder with Luffy himself in the battle against God. And to fully understand what Oda is actually building between this fated duo, strap in, because it's now become clear that all this time, the world of One Piece has been waiting on two destined warriors, not one. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe.
And it's a new year, which means you probably want to get in better shape. But getting in shape can seem so difficult because it means sticking to a diet. And it's genuinely really hard to stick to a healthy diet. That's why Factor makes it so easy for you. Factor is a meal delivery service prepared by nutritionists and professional chefs, meaning you don't have to plan your meals every week, you don't have to shop for meal ingredients every week, and you don't have to cook your own meals every week. Factor will put your healthy lifestyle on autopilot for you, and all the food tastes really good. And if you are trying to stick to a specific diet, you can even select specific meal plans from Factor, like Calorie Smart, Keto, Vegetarian, Protein Heavy, and so on. Getting in shape is just so easy with Factor. All you have to do is select your meal plan, and then keep eating the delicious meals it sends you. And a last huge bonus if you sign up with Factor right now is that you will also get free breakfast from Factor for a year. So start the year off right by heading to factor75.com or click the link below and use code MORGEFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for a year. That's code MORGEFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for a year.
So to begin with, Loki is the first and only character in One Piece to have a story that is written to directly parallel Luffy's. Loki is the only other character to have the same origin point, whereas young children, both Luffy and Loki, end up meeting a certain great pirate who they come to idolize and who shapes a lot of their worldviews. Luffy of course has Shanks, and Loki has Rox. Luffy of course gained much of his ideology through Shanks, and it's because of Shanks that Luffy came up with his dream of finding the One Piece and becoming Pirate King. And while Luffy and Shanks' relationship was very close to father and son, with Shanks being very kind and nurturing towards Luffy, Rox and Loki's relationship was fittingly a lot bumpier, with Rox aggressively rejecting Loki as his ward early on. But as we dug deeper into Rox and Loki's characters, we did discover a heart of gold underneath the surface for both characters, which is why by the end of Rox's flashback, we learned that Rox did in fact mentor Loki in some ways and teach him certain important lessons that stuck and shaped Loki's values and ideology going forward, just as Shanks did for Luffy. It all comes full circle at the end of the Rox and Herald flashback, where we learn that after all this time, despite Loki seemingly rejecting Herald's ideals and adamantly believing that Elbaf should be about war rather than peace, it turns out that in the end, underneath it all, it's revealed that even if Loki didn't share Herald's beliefs, he did actually deeply respect them and wanted to honor them, and felt that it would be better if Elbaf continued down Herald's ideology rather than Loki's. And this understanding of Loki's all goes back to Rox's conversation with Loki, where even though Loki didn't fully understand it at the time, Rox explained to him that everything that Herald did was out of love for the country of Elbaf. And that in itself is another beautiful parallel, as if we go back to Rox's own relationship with Herald, again, Rox was all about war, whereas Herald was all about peace. And while outwardly, Rox would call him a coward and soft for this ideology, underneath, all along, Rox actually understood where Herald was coming from and the importance of the ideal of love. Because Rox's final defiant words to Emu were in fact Rox adamantly defending Herald's ways and the value of pushing for peace. So So as we can see, Rox and Loki, though both proud, aggressive, wild warriors who believe that violence and battle is the solution to the problems of the world, which inherently put both of them at odds with Harold's overly peaceful ways. Despite that being the case for both Rox and Loki, Rox did underneath always understand the value of Harold's pacifism, and he did impart that onto Loki, such that Loki was ultimately able to understand that value as well, and honor it as well later on. So at the end of the day, we can see how identical Luffy and Loki's origin stories are. They both gained a large portion of their general moral standing and worldview from the two great pirate figures of their era that inspired them. Loki's style and path is just a bit more roguish and anti-hero-esque than Luffy's, because that happens to be the style of the pirate who inspired him. But the deliberate similarities don't just stop there. Loki's core personality also mirrors Luffy's in a way that genuinely no other character in the series does. In Loki's first conversation with Luffy, Oda does something very important, which is that he immediately establishes that as unique as Luffy's personality is in the grand scheme of One Piece, this new character Loki is the closest to actually mirroring our protagonist's personality that we've ever seen in the story so far. Right off the bat, Loki establishes that his core driving desire is freedom, just like Luffy. Now this might sound simple, after all, One Piece is a series about freedom, but on closer examination, Oda actually usually doesn't write characters being defined by a drive for freedom. Oda tends to actually save that for a rare few characters, such as Luffy, Roger, and Dragon. And we can see, of course, that the pattern is that these are all monumentally important figures in the story of One Piece. And now we add Loki to that group, but where Loki stands out is that he is Luffy's first contemporary and true peer who is also defined by freedom in the same way Luffy is, which speaks volumes about Loki's narrative potential in the final saga. But it goes one step even further than that, which is that in that first conversation between Luffy and Loki, Oda even begins to take some things that were once completely unique to Luffy and begins ascribing them to Loki as well, such as Luffy's trademark quirk of consistently misnaming other characters. And while that on its own may seem a little bit surface level, once you consider the direct parallels in their origin stories, their driving motivations for freedom, the striking similarities in their attitudes, all of that already makes for the character in One Piece who is most clearly being written to be Luffy's direct counterpart. But the kicker of it all is, of course, their destined devil fruits. All of this remarkably similar narrative framing that Oda has been doing for Luffy and Loki is simply lead up to the unique dual role that the two are meant to have. Luffy and Loki seem to be the two destined warriors that the world has been waiting on, and it all comes down to their fruits. For a long time, we were under the impression that Luffy's fruit is the only truly special one in the world. The one and only legendary fruit that the Gorosei and the world government have been trying to get their hands on, but failing to for centuries. And once we saw its powers, that this one fruit could really break all the rules of reality and bring one's imagination to life, it all made sense. It seemed like this could be the one fruit that Imu, God, really truly feared. The very same fruit that Joy Boy once had. So for a long time, it seemed like Luffy was one of one. But now we have learned that there are actually two parts to this. Rox revealed to us that there are actually two devil fruits that are needed to defeat Imu, meaning that Luffy's fruit alone isn't the key. The royal family fruit of Elbaf is also a legendary fruit that seems vital to defeating Imu. And the most important point is that these two fruits seem to be needed together, as Rox sincerely believed that if he and Harold, having eaten the Elbaf fruit, joined forces together, then even Imu could not stop them. Of course, that wasn't to be in Rox and Harold's generation, but the idea is that the precedent was set for the future of the story. Right there, Oda is establishing the notion of a dynamic duo being what is needed to defeat the world government. And so it's fitting that Loki, with all of his extreme parallels to Luffy, has been revealed to have eaten this other legendary fruit that is also vital to defeating Imu. It has been hyped up as a fruit that can supposedly end the world, and from what little we've been teased of it, it seems to generally live up to its billing, as the fruit was so powerful that it allowed Loki to even match a powered-up herald, a being so powerful that even Gaban and Emu sincerely could not imagine anyone defeating. And what's particularly interesting about the two fruits, Luffy's and Loki's, is that while Luffy's fruit is always framed around bringing the dawn, Loki's fruit is framed around bringing destruction, specifically the end of the world. And that's fascinating, as throughout One Piece, dawn and destruction have always been framed as two halves of the same coin. We see arc after arc in One Piece that often the dawn of a land can only be brought about through its destruction, strongly suggesting that Loki and Luffy have a connected role to play in the final war. Now, of course, Luffy will ultimately be the final main hero of One Piece, but Loki will likely be coming in right behind him in terms of importance, as that simply is the dichotomous nature of the fruits that destiny has handed each of them. There are even strong parallels in how the two obtain their fruits. While Luffy of course technically had the Gomu Gomu no Mi since his childhood, the actual legendary version of the fruit, the Nika form, is something that he only awakened against Kaido, in this great battle against a seemingly unstoppable monster where Luffy's haki alone was not enough, and where even hordes of other fighters fell trying to take down this monster. Luffy was able to finally return, having awakened the powers of his legendary fruit to stand toe-to-toe with Kaido and defeat the monster one-on-one. Much like Loki against Harold, who had become an unstoppable monster, could not defeat Harold with his haki alone, and so as Harold tore through hordes and hordes of mighty warriors who were unable to stop him, finally Loki returned, having awakened the powers of the legendary fruit, and was able to fight and defeat the great monster Harold one-on-one. And it's especially fitting that both Luffy and Loki were literally chosen by their fruits as well, with it being strongly hinted that the Nika fruit deliberately chose Luffy to be the one to eat it, much like Loki was very literally chosen by Ragnar to be the one to be allowed to eat Elbaf's legendary fruit. But with all this discussion of Loki's deep significance and connection to Luffy in the story, does that mean that Loki is set to actually join Luffy as a Straw Hat in his journey to becoming Pirate King? The answer is most definitely no. But first, this winter, you can become Aokiji with the first ever Devil Fruit inspired hoodie, the Ice Hoodie.
Oh, that's cold.
This is a fully fashioned, multicolored jacquard hoodie engineered at the stitch level. The pattern is literally knitted directly into the fabric, creating a rich, icy texture that won't fade, crack, or wear away over time. And right over the heart, you have the embroidered Devil Fruit detail. The hoodie is 100% cotton, breathable, and built to last. This level of quality for One Piece inspired fashion is something you truly cannot get anywhere else. And this January, the first 30 people to get their Ice hoodie will also get any 2 posters you want for free, including the 2 brand new exclusive Aokiji posters that can only be gotten with the hoodie. All hoodies are made to order and will take some time to ship. So make sure you get your Ice hoodie today, the first and only Devil Fruit inspired hoodie in existence. So this is the final point regarding Loki's future that must be addressed, because many readers feel that, well, Luffy asked him to become a Straw Hat, and we can tell that Loki's really important, therefore is he being set up to be a Straw Hat? But that is actually missing the bigger picture with the character. To begin with, at the most simple logistical level, Loki is just far too strong to join the crew. By all rights, Loki should be stronger than Luffy himself right now by a good margin, having gone toe-to-toe with a character who is even more powerful than Rocks. Loki is in fact so strong that Oda has actually chosen to severely nerf Loki for the Elbaf arc, with it being established that it will take literal months for Loki to get back to full strength. And there is very literally no reason for Oda to do this to Loki in this arc, unless it's to make sure that Loki doesn't severely outshine Luffy. Loki is essentially the first Straw Hat candidate that we've had in the story who doesn't just potentially threaten Zoro or Sanji's status as the second or third strongest in the crew, but rather threatens Luffy's own status as strongest in the crew. But while that's the most basic reason for Loki not joining, it also just would not make any sense for his character. If there's one thing that is crystal clear about Loki, it is that this is a character who does exactly what he wants. He is not the type to ever bow down and call someone else his captain, which is why Loki has already refused Luffy's offer. But the biggest reason that Loki is not going to join the crew is that it has been fairly clearly foreshadowed that his role is going to be a lot larger and unique to him. It's not just that Loki is going to have his own role freeing the Galila giants and leading them and such, whereas the Straw Hat Pirates are all figures who are written to be Luffy's strongest supporters, standing at the back of their captain. Loki is clearly being written as the first character whose role is actually to genuinely stand shoulder to shoulder with Luffy when the time for the final war comes. So I personally am absurdly excited to see the full role that Oda has carved out for this character in the final saga. Let me know in the comments below exactly what you believe Loki will do in the final war, and if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe. And you can get my extended thoughts on how Loki's role pits him against both Emu and Blackbeard in my weekly podcast that just dropped by becoming a member or by supporting me on Patreon. Link in the description below.